Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast, right here on the record with the Ohio Senate, the views the news excludes. I'm your host, John Fortney, the Director of Communication with the Ohio Senate Republican Caucus, the Majority Caucus in the Senate. As always, great to have the President of the Ohio Senate, Matt Huffman, on the program. It is called the President's Podcast, after all.
Yeah, I think so. It's it goes with the office, not with the person, no. But yeah.
Really busy week this week. January 24th session, a lot of coverage leading up to it about the override of House Bill 68, the governor's veto of House Bill 68. The House went first because it originated as a House bill. And you were on the record in our first podcast of January saying the Senate does plan to override, and that's exactly what we did. Why did we do that?
Well, I guess at a very fundamental level, it's the job of the legislature to make the laws of the state of Ohio. Of course, the constitutional provision, much like the federal law, allows the executive to exercise a veto. And in essence, if the legislature really means it, they can override the veto if there's enough people to do that. And that's a 3/5 majority in the state of Ohio. So that's how an override happens. And although we have become used to in modern government saying, well, our leader leads us, or, well, no, we don't have a king, we don't have a sovereign, as it were. The state itself is a sovereign, but the legislature makes the laws. And so, of course, the governor, I think he exercised in the budget 44 vetoes. And there have been a number of other bills that have been overridden. But in this General Assembly, these are the only two vetoes that have been overridden.
There have been, really, it's a separation of powers issue when it comes to the powers of the legislature versus the powers of the executive branch and the powers of the judiciary. So it's really what the Constitution provides the Ohio General Assembly to say, no, notwithstanding the objections of the governor, I believe is the language, that with a 3/5 vote and with the vote of the Senate of 24 votes on Wednesday, we were able to override the veto of House Bill 68.
Yeah, and that's, of course, we would only need 20, but 24 senators voted to do that. Someone mentioned to me the governor had put out an executive order also on the same subject. It actually was more expansive in some ways than 68 was. And those executive orders, that executive order in particular, it may not be legal. Governors, just like presidents and mayors and other executives, only have the authority to do the things that either the Constitution or the legislature give them. There's no separate, well, I think this is a good idea, we're going to do that. Now, that doesn't discount the fact that governors have opinions and things happen because governors want them to happen. But in this case, there's an extensive amount of testimony, extensive amount of expert testimony, really over a couple of years. Obviously, the House felt very strongly about it. The Senate did also. And, I understand the issues of, well, this only affects a small minority of people. But I don't think that we say, well, it only affects the small people, so we don't care about that. These are really terrible precedents to have in a society. And, I think the legislature spoke pretty clearly.
Well, most people know very well what House Bill 68 addresses. And basically it did two things, just to quickly recap, and I'll summarize. One, it banned sex change operations for children, minors. And the second thing, it basically said that girls' sports is reserved for girls. And boys' sports, if you're going to participate in girls' sports, you need to be a girl. Those are the two basic things that did. But you wouldn't believe that if you read the news the day after the override vote on Thursday. Here's a story from the Ohio Associated Press. The headline is, Ohio bans gender-affirming care and restricts transgender athletes despite GOP governor's veto. The very lead of the story, in the first sentence, it says, Ohio has banned gender-affirming care for minors. That's completely false.
Yeah, so part of when you have a particular dialogue, one of the things is let's get a set of words together so that when they're first heard by someone you're trying to influence, that they say, well, gee, that seems unfair. So the phrase gender affirming care, it's a bit of a nonsense phrase, but it's sort of like diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, that all sounds good, but what is meant by that? So gender affirming care, that phrase is, this person has decided what their gender is and we're going to affirm it with this care. Well, of course, we're either born a male or a female, and we're not affirming anything. We're deciding for whatever reason that we want to physically change our bodies. Now, you never completely change from a female to a male or opposite. You may change aspects and physical parts of your
Can't change your
body.
chromosomes.
You can't change your chromosomes. So using that phrase sort of at the first blush, people go, oh, well, if it's affirming, that seems like a good thing. And the same thing is true when people say, well, we're going to ban trans athletes from participating in sports. Well, a whole set of things are wrong about that. First of all, nobody's banned from playing sports. Whoever's not allowed to do what they want in high school sports and college sports in the state of Ohio under this law, doesn't mean they can't play a sport. I got cut from the 8th grade basketball team. I didn't stop playing basketball because of that. And someone who isn't allowed to participate in girls' sports, a boy who isn't allowed to participate in girls' sports, that doesn't mean they can't play in that sport. Of course they can. You just can't play on the state-sponsored team that the public is paying for and providing funds for and all of that. And of course there are a lot of examples where people are out playing in sports and doing things. And this is really simply a matter of two things: safety and fairness. And girls, generally speaking, are not going to be able to compete on an athletic field with boys, especially in certain kinds of sports.
Field hockey. We had Riley Gaines on the podcast, of course, with you.
Yeah.
And she talked about several instances, not only hers, of where women and teenage girls were being injured on the lacrosse field or on the volleyball court.
Yeah, and there's the danger aspect of it, but it's a fairness aspect. And you can certainly see a situation where if in a particular community 4 or 5 boys decide, you know what, wouldn't it be great if senior year we all decided to be transgender athletes and we're going to go win the girls' state basketball championship. And those are, again, it may seem like it, if you look at somebody and say, well, we're not going to let you do that, and a person thinks that's so fundamentally unfair, again, you're going to be able to participate in sports. You just can't do this with all these girls.
But the fairness part also goes to the young girl who is kept off the team because a boy that identifies as a girl is now on the team.
Yeah. I mean, there is the loss of position, there's loss of awards and perhaps scholarships, but it really is the people you're competing against that I think is the basic fairness. I mean, I know in college, for example, often women's teams will get a set of 5 moderately talented male athletes to practice against because it's better. They're typically better than even the best women's basketball team. My daughter-in-law was a great basketball player in college, and that's something that they would often do. So, it's a fairness issue, but it's also a safety issue.
I wanted to also get back to a couple issues within the Associated Press story that went out across Ohio. It also says 68 restricts mental health care for transgender individuals under 18. Well, no, it only says that the parents need to know before they enter into this type of health care. Counseling is certainly provided under House Bill 68, and parents have a right to know what is going on with their child.
Yeah, and so what this is about, what this is addressing is we know that in not all public schools, but in some public schools, and probably some other schools too, there is a thought process or a community of people who believe that they need to tell children that this is a possibility that they may be a transgender person. And one thing we know about kids are they're impressionable, they don't make very good decisions, and often they think something is true because somebody told them it was true. So that thought process begins, and the parents don't know about it. And sometimes the parents are, well, gee, I need to support my child, or perhaps there's pressure from their own community to do that. And what we want to make sure is that parents know about this up front, including in schools or other outside institutions. And if this counseling is going to take place, the parents have to know about it. That's not something that somebody should be engaging in, independent of what the parents know about. And let me say this too, John. This is such a fundamental idea that the parents should know about this extraordinary potential change in their child's life, that we actually have people arguing about that. Well, maybe we don't want to put pressure on the children. No, 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 no. It's not up to you. It's not up to the outside society. It's not up to some unknown person. This is up to the parents or the whoever is in that position, whether it's grandparents, aunts, uncles, other trusted adults.
Yeah, most parents would want to know who their child is talking to online, or if they're drinking alcohol, or if they're smoking pot, or whatever it might be.
Of course, yeah.
Right. Going on in the story, it said Senator Christina Rogner, quoting here, a Republican from Summit County falsely asserted on the Senate floor that there is no such thing as gender-affirming care. It's interesting that the reporter would say falsely asserted. It's like fact-checking a floor speech, what one believes what one is saying. And Senator Rogner talked about, basically we're talking about so-called gender-affirming care that really does not affirm the sex or gender that they were born as. What do you think about this sort of fact-checking that in the news report? It'd be one thing to see it on the editorial page, but the news report says falsely asserted on the Senate floor.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it shows the difference today in news stories that, and you know, we've talked about this in other podcasts. I mean, you know, there's always been reporters who said, here's how I'm going to write this story.
There's a narrative instead of
Sure, there certainly is. And for the reporter to simply say, that's false. Well, if you want to argue your case, you can say, here's what Christina Rogner said. There are other people that say that assertion is false, and here's who those people are.
They could have said, challenged the idea.
But the point is, the reporter who's supposed to be reporting facts is just simply, of course it's false, because we've already determined this is false before we wrote the story.
Right, but that standard was not applied to the following line. Senate Minority Leader Nikki Antonio, a Cleveland area Democrat, called the measure bullying. It didn't say falsely asserted that transgender youth were being ostracized, and did not falsely assert that they were taking away parental rights. It says, rather than those that ostracize transgender youth and take away parental rights. So the same standard was not applied.
Well, we understand that it's not going to be. You know, there was also a description in the testimony and by one of the senators on the floor of children, now adults, who had basically a double mastectomy and a number of things done to their genitalia, who now are in tremendous pain, can't have children or can't breastfeed, can't do a whole number of other things because they went through this when they were 13 or 14 years old. That's not in the story anyway, because those horrific things are what the public is recoiling from. Wait a minute, this is actually happening in society. So it's unfortunate we're not going to change the mind of the reporter or of the editor of the AP who says this is how we're going to write stories.
Let's move on to the second veto that was held on the Senate floor, and that dealt with a provision, a piece of policy in the budget, House Bill 33, that was passed in June. And basically it said that cities, local governments cannot pass a stricter tobacco law than what the state of Ohio says. Is that correct?
Yeah. We have, of course, in the Constitution of the state of Ohio, a number of provisions. The state of Ohio is a sovereign. In other words, we decide what happens within the state of Ohio through the legislature, the acts of the governor, and all the things the Constitution provide. As a state, we are also part of a 50-state union under the United States Constitution. and what the federal government can do and the state can do. There, of course, are always arguments about that, the Interstate Commerce Clause and a number of other things. So in the state of Ohio, we have something called home rule. There are certain things that cities and other local jurisdictions can do, and the state can't keep them. In other words, the state can't control that. Now, ever since that's put in the Constitution, we've been having litigation over exactly what that means. And, knowing where that line is, and sometimes it changes based on judicial decisions, but knowing where that line is a bit of an art form. So there's two reasons why this was important. One is commerce. If there are different rules about commerce in the over 600 municipal corporations in the state of Ohio, that makes it different. There's 35 separate cities in Cuyahoga County. And the reason why that's important is the folks in Columbus who can't buy these products, they're not going to not buy the products. They're going to drive out to, as someone told me, the gas station that's out on 270, but they're not going to buy the other stuff they usually buy here and then go out and get the one product. They'll say, sorry, local grocery store, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get my whatever nicotine products I want. I'm going to get bread and milk and lottery tickets and whatever. And I'll just get it all where I can get it. So it actually is bad for the city of Columbus. The folks on the Columbus City Council, they don't think about things like that, obviously. People vote with their feet. They take their money where it is that they want to go. The second reason, other than a matter of commerce, of course, is the state of Ohio makes money off of selling tobacco or others selling tobacco. We have a tax. That tax comes to the state, and we, among other things, return that money to local governments and to local schools and to run state parks and DRC and all of the other things that we do. That's where this money comes from. Well, if the city of Columbus decides, for one thing, we don't care about all those taxes we're going to lose, not just on the sale of the nicotine, but all the other taxes, because people are going to go out there and buy gas, and the gas money will go to New Albany instead of the city of Columbus, right? But, that's one thing. But they're also the state of Ohio, for those who don't buy it, the state of Ohio's income and tax revenues. Well, you may say, well, if they're going to buy it in New Albany and Columbus, well, if you're in Cincinnati, just going to go to northern Kentucky and do it, right? If you're in Ashtabula, you can go over to Erie, Pennsylvania, and people in Toledo can go up to Monroe, and all of the things we know about having states around us that do things differently. So, I understand the governor has a particular passion for this issue. That's fine. There's actually a compromise. I think that a lot of folks wanted that we should ban statewide all the products that the FDA bans. But that compromise was not
It's kind of ironic,
taken
too,
up.
that based on the passage of issue 2, that you could buy recreational marijuana, but not menthol cigarettes.
Well, yeah, and
Yeah.
by the way, I stopped saying recreational marijuana because that kind of makes it sound happy. It's marijuana.
It's pot.
It's just pot, and people are going to get high, and they're also going to get sick, and there's a number of other problems that are going to happen as a result of that. But yeah, you're not allowed to buy marijuana, but we got to get rid of menthol cigarettes, I guess.
There was a news conference this week with Senator Rob McCauley, and Senator Teresa Gavrone. It's Senate Bill 215 they introduced. It bans foreign contributions on issue campaigns. Is this something that you support?
Yeah, it is. We have a whole set of influencers in these elections when it comes to money. So the candidates, Matt Huffman for Senate, Matt Huffman for Ohio, I can raise money, but I can only raise it from a certain group of people. There's a limit on what we have to do. There's a limit on how we can spend it. Most importantly, we have to report all of that. And it's extensive reporting. You have to give the employment of the person who gave you the money, and on and on and on. Well, and the same is true for the campaign committee. So the RSCC for the Senate, Republican Senate Campaign Committee, people can give. There's a different set of restrictions, but that all has to be reported. So the campaigns and the candidates especially the candidates, are really at a disadvantage because what are called dark money organizations, which we know dark money Democrat organizations and Republican, are participating in a lot of not only elections for candidates, but issues. And they don't have the same reporting requirements that I have.
Yeah, some of them fund media outlets as well. But
Well, right. Well, yeah, well, I understand. I think AP, they're aforementioned there, they receive a large pile of money from one of these outfits too. So those dark, we don't know necessarily, in some cases, where they get the money. It all sort of props up, 3 weeks before Election Day. This bill that Senators McCauley and Gavarone are considering is really bans something that in my mind is even more sinister, and that's money from a foreign source. Now, we know that Russia, for example, has tried to affect our elections. That's true of a lot of different countries. Even some of our allies would rather see one person elected than someone else. In this particular case that I think prompted this was there's a Swiss businessman who put about $12 million into the issues camp races. Now, we know that there were locals. I think there was one Columbus person who put in $1 million in support of issue 1 in November. And so this simply says if it's foreign, you can't do it. You can't accept the money.
they were referring to the 1630 fund that is basically the founder of that is Swiss billionaire Hans-Jörg Weiss, who over the last several years has provided $200 million. And then that money gets sent out to different organizations. And
Sure, yeah, and my guess is that this billionaire doesn't think too much about that. He's got somebody sitting over there who's convinced him this is how we save the world, but we got to elect our people to do it. And it's like any other political operation. It's about power and money.
when we see that $61 million, I believe, around that, was spent on, I believe, issue 1, and some of that was possibly issue 2 last November, and you have a constitution in Ohio that really then is a target when somebody can spend that kind of money to get a simple majority vote to place themselves in the Constitution. Is that even more reason why foreign contributions are so dangerous?
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's completely outside the scope of any real, the ability to influence or control or do anything like that. And when we know, you mentioned that media outlets themselves are receiving money from these C4s, and we can see how the stories like that are. Those are the people. Here's what we're paying for you to write this, not write this. That becomes so. You've got the media, you've got the C4, and I've sat in a room TV and TV commercial comes on and somebody I know doesn't believe that, and they say, well, geez, I didn't know that was true. And I'm like, well, because it's not. And I explain it to them. They're like, but you can't have the other side sitting in the room all the time. And it's often the case that the people who spend the most money are the ones who win.
Well, and legislating also by constitutional amendment is really not the way the government was designed to operate.
Yeah,
it's not the opposite. You don't have hearings on a bill. You don't have the thorough vetting that you would on something that goes through the General Assembly.
Right, and we're seeing that right now with the marijuana provision that was put on the ballot. There are a number of inconsistent in terms that, for example, the products have to have a minimum THC, which is equivalent of alcohol percentage. And, the proponents over there said, well, it does say minimum, but we meant maximum. Well, that probably would have been caught if we had had a series of hearings, and of course the people who are selling the marijuana are the taxes that are collected, they're getting that back. That never would have happened. And so, you put it all together, you write it exactly the way you want. The people who are going to make money off of it say this is what it's about, and now you end up with this terrible process. And people defending it by saying, well, that's what the voters wanted. Well, these voters who voted here in an off-year election said we want legalized marijuana. The rest of the stuff, I don't think that they were voting for that.
And there were some changes that were made to issue 2 that were amended into House Bill 86, I believe it was. That's in the House right now. I know it's something that you and also the governor worked on. I believe he supports. What's the update on that, if any?
Well, I don't think there is any update. I spoke to the governor Monday. I think we sort of were collectively frustrated at the lack of activity by the House because right now these products are being sold or can be sold essentially unregulated. And, some libertarian may say, well, that's just fine. They ought to be able to. But if we're selling milk and we don't know whether it's been pasteurized or properly stored, if we're selling automobiles and we don't know whether the gas tank's going to explode or not, if we're selling alcohol and we don't, or food, think of all the other potential dangerous products, which is just about everything that's sold. Now we're having marijuana, something that's ingested right into your body. There is no regulation. So it's a dangerous situation right now.
We were talking a little bit about, obviously, the impact of foreign donations and issue campaigns and a simple majority that it would take just to put yourself into the Constitution. And I think I said in the prior podcast with you, at least in a column that I have ready to go for our new edition of On the Record, I'm calling, you see almost every story now that in the political pages, it comes with a preface of the gerrymandered Ohio General Assembly, right? It's like it's the new breakfast cereal for the media and for the Democrats and the left. It's like, well, my pancakes were cold, gerrymandering, traffic was bad, gerrymandering, my candidate didn't win, everything's blamed on gerrymandering. And there is a campaign that's gathering signatures to try to, again, change the redistricting process in the state of Ohio that was passed originally with more than 70% of the voters. So what's your thoughts? Are we seeing that narrative being built into everything, even though the Redistricting Commission passed maps for the General Assembly on a unanimous vote, including the Democrats?
Yeah, well, so for a long time, of course, we had this, and we came together, really both parties in the state and significant a number of voters, and passed these two for the General Assembly and for congressional redistricting. The design of this has nothing to do with fair districts or prevent gerrymander or anything like that. It's how do we elect more Democrats and more liberal Democrats. That is what these folks are paying for. And you don't get what you want by arguing your case and say you just keep spending the money and keep saying the same thing.
Wherever that money comes from,
yeah, right?
Well,
from a Swiss billionaire, among other people. So they're just going to kind of keep repeating the same things over and over. We're going to have this great discussion over the next few months. And I don't think that Maureen O'Connor will explain why she sat on this decision for 4 months till just before the filing deadline in 2022. Hopefully some engaging reporter from the Associated Press will ask her that. I doubt it, but we'll see. And but we're going to have this discussion. If it passed, I think and they get the right people, which almost assuredly will be university professors who profess to be independent, to draw these maps, it'll really result in two things. One is that Republicans will still control the legislature, but there will be fewer African American Democrat legislators, because what they would like to do is have less compact districts, even though they've argued other way, have less compact districts and take inner cities and stretch them out to the suburbs so that they can spread out the number of Democrat voters. That's what they would like to do. That's what their maps that they professed before. The one that former Representative Kathleen Clyde submitted had a district that went from downtown Cincinnati to Ada, Ohio, home of Ohio Northern University. So those are the kind of maps they're looking for, because those are the ones that can elect the people they want in office, which, by the way, John, is the definition of gerrymandering.
Yeah, they call that representational fairness.
Yeah,
that's the two-word definition of gerrymandering.
Yeah, that's another one of those 1984 phrases.
I did a little deeper dive into their statute, their ballot initiative, and under one section, it talks about the panel of 15 that they want to put together and how they're going to put that together, and try to follow this. It says, provide that the 15 members of the commission shall be selected as follows. The panel, by a majority vote, shall create a pool of 90 applicants that collectively form a geographically and demographically representative cross-section of Ohio, with 30 affirmed by the first major party, 30 affiliated with the second major party, and 30 independents provide a portal for public comments on the applicants in the pool and provide for publicly broadcast interviews by the panel of the 90 applicants. The panel then shall select 45 finalists from the pool who collectively from a geographically and demographically representative cross-section of Ohio. 15 affiliated with the first major party, 15 with the second major party, and 15 independents. In a public meeting, the panel shall randomly draw six names. It kind of sounds like they're going to be drawn to participate in the Ohio lottery show, to become finalists to be the commission. I mean, that's a lot of people, a lot of ambiguity. It's very difficult to follow when it seems that we have a very solid blend of if you win a seat in the executive branch, you might be on the redistricting commission. And we expanded the old apportionment board out to the redistricting commission and require Democrat votes to get a 10-year map. That seems pretty fair to me, as opposed to 90 people in the first pool, and then we're going to do interviews, and we're going to televise those and get down to 45, and whatever this means.
Yeah, it's extraordinarily complex. And remember that when you go to redistrict, and of course that's done every 10 years after the census data is going to be made available to you to begin drawing a map in July of the year ending with 1. And of course you need the maps for people to file. Right now we say by September 15th. And you need the maps by, in a presidential year, you have to file by the beginning of December. So to know that, you're going to have to really have maps by October or so. But you got to go through all that. And then you're going to have 6 people who've never drawn a map before. Now they're going to go out and hire somebody. But if you're randomly drawing out of 45 people and 15 and 15 and 15, well, what if you draw 6 Republicans out of the hat? Are people going to say, hey, wait a minute, that can't be true? And the other part to this is when we say independent, well, what does that mean? Does that mean I've never voted in a primary for any party in my life, or in the last 6 years, or exactly what it is? And typically what folks like to say, and you see it, of course, a lot of newspapers, is university professors are the experts on elections on whatever it is.
They know more than we do, apparently.
Well, in a lot of cases they do, but certainly in the mechanical engineering department they know more than we do, than I do. But it's also really a closed culture. They have, in the last 20 or 30 years, have expelled or prevented entry of people who don't think like them. That's a big problem, and we see that right now. 83. So those are the folks that this is designed to come in, and they're, of course, going to kind of draw a map that will elect the people that they want. The restrictions that we have now that were approved by over 70% of the voters, the sets of incentives and penalties that are built in for both parties, when allowed to work, unlike when they were blocked by Maureen O'Connor in 2022, but when allowed to work, voila, we have a 8-year map with a unanimous vote.
And compact districts reflecting communities of interest.
Right. There's this map has the fewest divided communities of any map in the history of the state of Ohio.
Yeah, don't you want to keep the city of Cincinnati together?
Yeah, or you can cut Cincinnati in half and have downtown Cincinnati lined up with Ada, Ohio, in Hardin County. So, the hypocrisy of this is extraordinary. And of course, nobody's going to want to explain that. There isn't going to be an AP story talking about what you just talked about. They're going to say, it's gerrymandering, we need a better process. And that's what goes on the news headline, that's what goes in the mailer, that's what's going to pop up on your social feed.
We'll call that falsely asserting a narrative by the news media. Coming up also this spring, big budget that will draw a lot of interest from communities all around the state of Ohio. That's the capital budget, and what we affectionately call, or the finance director of the Senate, Ray DeRossi, likes to call the OTSCIF, the one-time Strategic Community Investment Fund. But this is really important investments. This funds important investments into communities around the state, including Lima, Ohio is going to be dedicating the new Lima Aquatic Park, which was really a special and very important program for you representing Lima.
Yeah, well, the one-time fund, which we're hopefully planning to get done here by Memorial Day-ish, maybe going into June. Those are going to be new dollars, but the money that was available for the Aquatic Center here in Lima was through a previous capital budget. And that is unfortunately, Lima had a pool, Schoonover Pool, since a lot of pools got built by the Works Project Administration, the WPA, in the 30s. And that pool wasn't salvageable. And so Lima has been without a public pool for a period of time. There's some private, if you belong to a private club, you can go swimming, but there's no public pool. So Mayor Smith worked with the local school district, a number of other local partners, and then Speaker Bob Cupp and I were able to get funds to allow that to be built. And there's going to be a groundbreaking of sorts here in a couple of weeks. And really proud it's going to be right by Lima Stadium on the way into downtown Lima.
These are projects that people see and recognize about what it really means to have that in the community. It would be hard for a lot of communities to, well, kids will like to go swimming, but we don't belong to a club and there is no pool.
Yeah, this is truly, it's one of those things that is part of a local community. It's not the job necessarily of the state of Ohio, even though we partially provided the funds, to go around and make sure that everybody has a pool. If communities want to come together, and I think it's part of our social fabric, if you will, to have a local pool that kids can go to. And I'm going to applaud the people who did this. They've really got a great design. It's going to allow some competition at both the high school and collegiate level. And so here in Lima, we're really excited about it.
And of course, you were criticized for, your efforts in securing that fund. No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah, well, some guys in Cincinnati, a columnist down there, thought it was outrageous that we would spend money on a public pool.
For the kids.
Hopefully there'll be some adults in there too. But and then Cincinnati, the Queen City, a great city in the state of Ohio, I voted on a number of capital budgets that had a pile of dollars for downtown Cincinnati. So I had a good conversation with that columnist, and he actually apologized, but that probably won't make it in the Associated Press story. So,
Senate President Matt Huffman, insightful as always. Happy New Year. Thanks for your time.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Thank you for joining us, and we will see you soon.